Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to grecochess, the YouTube channel of chess. I'm your host. My name is Harry Osiris, and I continue covering my participation in the Atlantic City Open Chess Tournament that took place a few days ago in Atlantic City, New Jersey. As we begin, first I'm going to share with you the details of the tournament. There were various sections. I participated in the under 1800 category, meaning players were eligible only if their rating was below 1800. In the 4-day schedule, which meant that the time control is what you see here, 40, 80, SD30, D30, meaning when game started, players had 80 minutes on their clocks for their first 40 moves. If they could complete these moves in that time, and if the game would continue, they would add another 30 minutes on their clocks. And when it was your time to move, for the first 30 seconds, the clock would not move. After that, if you needed more than 30 seconds to complete your move, it would continue going downwards. And of course, you need to complete your moves before the clock showed 0. In the first 3 rounds, I had 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss. And my opponent in round number 4 was Norman Vincent Punch, whose rating is 1,739, compared with mine that was 1,656. Unofficially, it had been raised to 1,706 after my most recent tournament at the Queen's Chess Club, but still Norman was a little bit ahead of me. And we're switching now to the analysis board of chess.com, where I'm going to enter the moves from the score sheet one by one. And here my hands. After every move, the computer is going to give a numerical evaluation. Positive number means white is doing better. Negative number means black is doing better. It's going to show which move would have been the best for the player, what are the top 5 options for the other player whose turn is to come, and will make a comment using symbols for the move that has been played. The best is 2 exclamation points, that is a brilliant move, and the worst is 2 question marks, that is a blunder. I have the white pieces, and they start as usual with pawn to e4, as usual for me, that is. Other players prefer the d pawn, or maybe the English opening, or the reti, or pawn to g3, and there are various ways. Recently on the internet, they showed that white can surprise your opponent with a pawn to b3. My opponent replied the symmetric way. The most common response is the Sicilian defense. Most recently, the Scandinavian defense has been very popular, pawn to d5. You may also play the Alekhine defense with knight to f6, and there are various options, but Norman went for the symmetric way, pawn goes to e5. To that, the usual reply for white is knight to f3. Sometimes you may want to surprise with pawn to d4, and this is a kind of what's called a gambit. You sacrifice the pawn for development. Other times you may want to try the Vienna with knight to c3, but I went with the standard way, knight to f3. And Norman replies the best move for this game. I mean, some people may play the Petrov, the Russian, with knight to f6. Or they may play the next one, that is pawn to d6, that is also acceptable. There are other various options, but he played the most standard way, knight to c6. And now, what are my options? The Spanish game, pawn to b5. The Italian game, pawn to c4. Actually, not pawn, bishop to b5, bishop to c4. And other ways, but I went with the Scotch Gambit, not because it's better, but because I know it a little bit better. These are more or less similar. Please ignore which the computer thinks is better than the others here on this column. At this point, it doesn't matter. And Norman will take back my pawn. And now the usual way to continue the Scotch game is take the pawn on d4, and then black either needs to send the knight to f6, or they may want to put the bishop to c5. But I want to surprise my opponent with the Scotch Gambit that quite often has given me some great results. Bishop, the most spectacular was once when in the Cheshire tournament, I checkmated my opponent in only 12 moves with the Scotch Gambit. My bishop goes to c4, and Norman replies what the computer thinks is the best move, bishop to c5. These moves until now are what are called book moves, meaning they have been analyzed extensively in opening theory, no surprises. And I continue with another book move with my pawn going to c3. The best reply is what Evan Hu played in my previous game, knight f6, but now Norman decided to take the pawn on c3, hoping beyond hope that eventually would let him take the b2 and the rook at a1 and he would promote to a queen. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy because now I reply with the move that if you don't know it could be a surprise. Bishop goes to f7 check. Computer thinks it's brilliant, but it's not something that I thought of it at the time. It's something that I knew in advance, have used many times, have seen the brilliant exclamation points. Why not do it? Now, if Evan takes it, queen goes to d5 check, and then I win the bishop on c5. Perhaps Evan found that this would happen, so instead he places his king to f8. And now, what should I do? I have to be careful with my bishop. There are many options, but to make sure I wouldn't blunder my bishop, let's take the knight. Not so good idea because the knight has not yet been moved, while my bishop is a very strong piece, and if a king takes it, queen can still check here. Computer thinks the best is knight to take to c3. Should I take it? Inaccuracy. Good is the computer, not very good. I should know it for the future. And Evan, he best replies to take on b2 because I cannot save the bishop because he's going to take the rook and then I would need to take here and I lost a pawn. But Norman instead used his rook of h8 to take my bishop now. Of course, he cannot take with the king because he takes the king, queen goes to d5 check, and then I win the bishop. That's why he takes with the rook. And now chance for me to win the pawn. I take it, of course, the knight, not with my pawn, because I want my pawns to be connected. Pawn goes to h6 for Norman. He's afraid I might place bishop or knight on g5. But this creates a hole on g6 and h5. G6 especially. My bishop goes to 4, develop it, putting pressure on c7. Computer doesn't like it, and pawn goes to g5, threatening my bishop. You see, yes, it's a one-move threat, but the problem with that is that Norman exposes his king. His king has no pawns in front, just a rook next to that. And the question is, will I be able to take advantage of that? I save my bishop first of all to g3. And Evan wants to develop, not Evan, I'm sorry, Norman wants to develop his pawn, sending it to d6. The bishop now on c8 is liberated. We finished the first 10 moves. What is the score? I'm leading by 1.32. Let's continue. I don't want the bishop, Norman's bishop, to land on g4. That's why my pawn goes to h3, but this doesn't really save me because pawn can go to g4, and if I take it, then bishop can go here. Bishop to e6 for Norman. My pawn goes to a3. I similarly don't want anything to land on b4. Inaccuracy is the computer. Queen goes to f6 for Norman. My queen goes to d2. I wanted to give more protection to my b2 pawn in case it's attacked. Rook to d8 for Norman that wants his rook to be opposite my queen. And I castle queenside, doubling, having queen and rook on the semi-open d file. And Norman attacks my rook. Bishop goes to d1, gets advantage of a hole I created after I pushed my pawn to a3. I save my rook, and this fifth, yes, I save my rook, goes to e1, and Norman pushes his pawn to a6. Perhaps he may want to push his pawn later to b5 and attack queenside towards my king. Norman's king is not very safe, but neither is my king that safe. Yes, there's a pawn on b2, but both of it's going to be an explosive game. None of the kings is really safe. We finished 15 moves. What's the score? I'm leading by 0.45. And now my knight goes to d5 and threatens the queen. Norman ideally should have taken the bishop. That's what the computer thinks. But instead he plays the fifth best move. Queen goes to f7. Computer is going to say that this is a mistake. I want to take advantage of they know it was a mistake, but of the situation and open even more the board, especially to the king side, because that is where Norman sees exist, while my king is on queen side. Pawn goes to h4. Great moves the computer. Knight goes to e5 for Norman. At this point, I was seriously thinking to take the knight on e5, but when I took it to the knight of the bishop, the problem is that after he recaptures with a pawn, my knight on d5 is pinned. In the future, a move to c6 would really lose the rook. Of course, computer has a different way. He thinks the knight should take on e5, the pawn takes back, and then the queen goes to c3, and the knight is not pinned anymore. Bishop goes to d4, attacks the queen. Queen takes the bishop on b3. And that's what the computer thinks is the best, but I couldn't see all that. Instead, I decided to take the pawn on g5 to really open the board even more. Misses the computer. Knight to e5 would have given me 3.10. Now I only have 0.55 advantage. So Norman takes my knight on f3. I take it back with my pawn. And if he takes my pawn, I take the pawn on h6, and his king is really exposed. Then if I can land the rook on f4, the queen is lost. That's why he takes my pawn on g5. Great moves the computer. I'm placing my rook on h6. If Norman does nothing, rook goes to f6 and the queen is lost. Of course, Norman saw it, surprise, surprise, but the story is it's not so much I'm hoping he's not going to see it, but while he's dealing with that, he cannot execute any other plans. His bishop goes to d5 and wins my knight. I have to take it back. I'm going to take it back with the pawn because with the queen, we change queens, and I'm in the attack. I don't want to change queens. Yes, my pawn is isolated, and my f pawns are double isolated. My pawn structure is horrible. That's why I better make sure the game ends before the ending. But until now, the score is more or less even. I'm only ahead by 0.63. Let's see what happened. Before I took it, it was 0.49. After 20 moves, 0.49. Now computer thinks I'm a little bit better, 0.63. But still, the game is more or less even until now. If I have better attacking chances, but if the game goes to the ending, then my pawn structure is horrible, meaning if Evan could exchange everything, everything but the king and the pawns, of course, then chances are against me. And Evan plays, and Norman, I'm sorry, Norman places his rook on g6. Computer says a blunder. From 0.62, my advantage becomes 5.41. Why? Only if I play the best possible move. You see, even the second best doesn't give me that much of advantage, but unfortunately I played it. Rook goes to h8 check. The story is that Norman has only two ways to reply, two legal ways, either, or three to be exact. You see here. If queen goes here, he loses his queen. When the computer, believe it or not, sees that this is his best possible answer. If he plays his rook, if his king goes to g8 to g7, then I win the rook. He played the only sensible move. I don't understand why the computer thinks that queen to g8 would be the best, because then he automatically loses the queen. He places his rook on g8, and now here we are. I have a huge advantage of 682, but it's not easy to spot during the game. During the game, we both have equal material. Neither of our king is too safe, although mine is slightly safer than his. Mine has no pawns in front. If it goes to the ending, I'm in a very bad shape with 3 pawn islands versus 2 for Norman. And then I got the idea. I played with the computer thinks the best and the only one that really gives me a huge advantage. Queen goes to g5. What's so great about this move is that it seems that I'm losing my queen because the rook is facing my queen, but because of the pin, the rook cannot take my queen because of the pin. And I want a pawn, and you may say a pawn, so what? A pawn, and I'm also threatening the rook on d8. If Norman decides to take my rook on h8, why not? His rook is lost. And I can continue in a very good shape. And if everything else is exchanged at this point, it seems that yes, the pawn structure of mine pawn structure doesn't look very good, but I have the f passed pawns. So what will Norman do? At this time, he was thinking and thinking and thinking, and he ended up with the fourth best move. You see, only two moves help him avoid the mate. One of them is crazy. Bishop goes to e3 with a check. Basically, he's losing his bishop. The second one is rook takes rook, and so queen takes rook then. And he thought it would be a little bit safer if his rook went to d7. Finished 23 moves, and after that move, I have mate in 4. I was thinking and thinking what to do. The fastest way on the computer is queen goes to h6, followed by rook going to g8, but I found another way. The third one, rook goes to e8 check. And you may think that I'm sacrificing my rook. But what are Norman's options? If he takes the queen, rook takes rook, and then I win the, and after thing goes anywhere, I win the queen. Takes it, I take it here, and then I win the queen. If he takes the king, I take with the rook, and Norman must take back with the queen because the e7 square is covered, and then I win the queen. Either way or other, I'm a queen ahead. I didn't see all the way to the mate that I would see that I had at least a queen. And at this point, Norman resigned. Nice win for me. I have 2 wins, 1 draw and 1 loss. And Norman tried to play very well. He knew a lot of moves quite well, but a few inaccuracies here and there. And I was able to win that game. Let's give a look at the review. How did we play? 82.1 for me, 64.6 for Norman. I had one brilliant move. Well, I'm not sure if I can call it brilliant because this is one that I knew from theory very well. When the bishop takes on f7 in the slot gambit. Great 3 versus 1 for me. Book 5 for me, 5 for Norman. Best 5 for me, for Norman. Excellent 3 for Norman, 1 for me. I had 3 good moves. Inaccuracies, 8 for Norman, 2 for me. Mistakes, I made 3 mistakes. Norman made 1. 1 missed each of us, and 1 blunder for Norman, basically when the rook went to g6. Until that time, and for the first 20 moves, the game was more or less even. My advantages were very small. Hence, as I mentioned before, after 4 rounds, I have 2 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. 3 more rounds to go. I'll cover them in the next video, see how did I do. And let's see how are we doing in the tournaments I've been following. participating in many of them, but I'm showing three of them that are the most interesting, I think. The one that I'm the host, the grecochess. That's Let's see how things are going there. We have one player who has been eliminated, Lois Adam. As after that, the three of us, this is my group. Zahid B16 from Pakistan has 3 points. Emar Hajif from Azerbaijan has 2 points. And myself, everything will depend on the 4 games I'm playing against the other two players. One advances to the next round. Let's give a look at all the pairings. One player has already advanced. Biopsychosocial from Germany has won all the games. He's advancing. The other groups continue. We'll have more news as the games unfold. What other tournaments do we have there? The annual one of chess.com, still waiting for the 2-3 remaining games of the first round to complete. This one here. It says here 3 games remain, but if I click the 3, there are 2 games remaining. And they have reached, one of them has reached 100 moves and the other 84. And the Moonlight Underwater of my subscriber, Daniela, is in the final round. Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament. We're in the final round, 6 players, 30 games to play, and as they complete, I'm going to cover these games. Möbius from Nigeria, Maxim Govorokar from Ukraine, Steam Rocket from Australia, Chinan4 from Greenland, MMT from Indonesia, and Picture74 from Italy. Some other news. May marks the first anniversary of a channel, and I'm thinking of having a celebration. If you want to participate, just send me a message. You can participate. We can either have a Zoom event, or if you prefer, you may send us one of your favorite games. Some of you have already sent some. So if there is any additional game that you want to send us, that will be great. I can show it and analyze it. Or if you prefer, you may just send us a message or any other idea you may have in your mind. Thanks to the viewers and subscribers, the likes and the comments. This is grecochess. I'm your host, Karilaos Eniziris. To all of you, goodbye.